So this is part 5 of me explaining every single kill team. In the first 4 parts, I went over every Imperium, Chaos, Xenos, and Eldar kill team. But there's been new kill teams that have come out since then. So this video is supposed to be filling in those gaps. So a lot of these, I've gone over the lore of the faction in previous videos. The teams have just been updated with new gameplay. So some of this lore I may be speedrunning a little bit. So just a heads up on there, I may be referencing past videos. So the first kill team we're going to talk about are the Intercessors, which is a Space Marine team. So what Intercessors are is they're kind of the main battle line infantry for the Primaris Space Marines. If you don't know what a Primaris Space Marine is, they're a newer variant in both lore and actually on the tabletop. And they're just like a bigger, newer Space Marine. Like, they're big enough if you take one of them and one of the, firstborn Marines and put them side by side, it doesn't look right. You can't really miss and match them on the tabletop without it looking kind of weird. Well, at least not within the same squad. So for the Intercessors, like I said, they're kind of your main battle line troop. So they're a jack of all trades. But I don't mean jack of all trades, master of none. They're kind of the master of everything. Because they are Space Marines. They're fast, they're intelligent, they're good at range combat, they're awesome in melee combat. There's nothing they can't do well. So there's 2 variants of the Intercessors. There's your normal Intercessor, which will have some kind of bolt gun for long range combat. And then you have your Assault Intercessor, which they'll typically have a chainsword and a bolt pistol. So they're more up close and personal. So if you watched my first video where we talked about the standard Compendium Space Marine team, you'll remember they still had Intercessors there. So what they did here is instead of being able to mix and match Intercessors with other types of Space Marines, here you can only run Intercessors, but they are more powerful. Like, if that was one of your fire teams, I highly recommend switching over to this team. The reason they're better are 2 main reasons. One is the Assault Intercessors can always fight twice. And then the normal Intercessors, if they have a bolt weapon, they can always shoot twice. And that is a major buff in kill team. The old ones theoretically could do that, but it would cost you command points, which are pretty valuable resources. You don't want to be using those if you don't have to. And the bigger thing with this team, as far as being interesting and powerful, is you can actually choose benefits on your chapter. So there's not a list of chapters like Ultramarines, White Scars, Space Wolves. But what it is there's a list of bonuses and you can pick 2. So you can pick the 2 that either you just like for gameplay purposes, or the 2 that you think match your team the best. Like if you're playing Space Wolves, you may want to choose something based on charging and melee. So if you want to play Space Marines and actually want those chapter bonuses and really like the Intercessors, kind of that aggressive playstyle, this is a really good option. So the next team I actually referenced in my Xenos video, but I didn't have the rules for them. And that is the Necron Hierotek Circle. So to kind of speedrun the lore here, the Necrons are one of the most ancient races in 40k, and they're basically skeletons made of living metal. They've been in hibernation for a long time, and they have some of the best technology of any race in 40k, possibly the best technology. So how this team is different than the normal Necron team is it's led by a Cryptek. So what a Cryptek is, they're kind of like the Psyker equivalent for Necrons. But Necrons don't actually connect to the warp and use warp magic. What they do is they basically have technology that's so advanced it looks like magic to the lesser races. So for this Cryptek, you have a couple of choices. One is a Psychomancer that can do stuff like make hard-light constructs, and they're really heavily based on fear. So for gameplay, they're going to be doing stuff that kind of nerfs your opponent because they're causing fear and panic. Then you have a Technomancer, and they're going to be based on repairing mostly. So they can instantly repair other Necrons, and they can do stuff like help with reanimation. And then you have a Chronomancer as your final option, so they control time. So besides them, you do have your Immortals and your Deathmarks still, so you do have a lot of long-range firepower. One of my friends plays Necrons and uses Deathmarks a lot, and those things are really painful to hit by. So combining that technology / magic option with these other Necrons just give you more options than a normal Necron team. Like, just by swapping out your leader, you can play pretty differently, because you can have one repairing, which just gives you a tankier team. Or you can have the one that messes with time and really have like a faster, more aggressive Necron team. So it's really easy to vary the playstyle just within one team. For gameplay, your models still have living metal, which means they auto-heal at the end of each round. So if your opponent just wants to kind of plink you and take off little small shots, it's not going to work. You're just going to heal back up. And you still have reanimation protocol, which is kind of like one of the trademarks of the Necron. So even if they take down one of your models, it might just come back to life. You also have plasma sights on this team, which can either buff your long-range models or help them with their reanimation. So that's another support unit you have access to. So kind of the play style Necron is surprisingly tanky for a long-range team. Really high damage, but they're slow. But with reanimation and their healing, they're very hard to take down. But here you have the twist and the variety of those different leader options, as well as some support models. So if you liked Necrons but wanted some more options, this is a great team to play. So the next team is the Kasrkin. These are part of the Imperial Guard, and the Imperial Guard is, for the Imperium, the closest thing to a real-world military you'll find. Like, in lore, they have their tanks, their artillery, their airstrikes, their normal human troopers. So, granted, there's a lot of the sci-fi craziness, but a lot of it is fairly real-world, just cranked up to 11. So the Kasrkin are the special forces of Cadia. And Cadia was one of the biggest planets that the Imperium would draw from for the Imperial Guard. Like, some of the best troops came out of it. They were known as the most disciplined. They would always follow the rules, and they got the best of the best in training, war gear, just everything. Here's a quote that I think sums up the Kasrkin really well. When veteran guardsmen flee, the Kasrkin stand. When victory is near, the Kasrkin seize it. When the archenemy attacks, the Kasrkin elite are the rock upon which the traitors shall break. So not only is their discipline and their training the best, but they also have the best equipment. They have hotshot lasguns, which are even more powerful than a normal lasgun. I know there's the whole meme of lasguns are flashlights, but they can still just blow stuff up, and the hotshot ones are even better. So for gameplay, they will be similar to something like Veteran Guard or the Adeptus Scions. So your individual troops aren't the toughest, but you do get a lot of them. Yes, I know I was just talking about how they're the most elite and they have the best equipment, but they are humans, and if you're fighting something like Chaos Space Marines, even if you're the best human, you're still a human. So you're better than something like Veteran Guard, you're a lot closer to the Adeptus Scions. So you still have your specialists like your medics and your sharpshooters, and you can run 4 gunners, which is a ton of firepower. Even really heavy tanky targets are not going to hold up to that if they come out in the open. So you can have all that combat focus and still have your other models to run around doing missions and objectives. And something really unique with this team is you get 10 elite points. This means when you're rolling a dice for shooting or melee, you can use these elite points to turn your dice into successes. And you get more of these every turn. So this gives you a ton of consistent damage where you know you're gonna get attacks off. So like I said, that many models and a bunch of heavy weapons and really consistent damage, plus better base stats than a normal Imperial Guardsman, it's a pretty solid team. As much as I like the visuals of the Veteran Guard, if I was going to pick one of the Imperial Guard teams to play, I think this would be it. Like I said, not that I follow the meta or anything, I just really like their playstyle. So the next team is the Drukhari team, the Hand of the Archon. So I talked about the Drukhari in my Eldar video, but to overly simplify it, they're basically Dark Eldar, or Dark Elves. They have a lot of the technology and they have the agility of the Eldar, but they have a dark twist. So to kind of slave off Slaanesh, which is one of the Chaos gods that is always hungering for Eldar souls, they basically constantly inflict pain. And then they take the psychic energy of this pain and kind of feed it to themselves to keep Slaanesh away. So they literally have to inflict pain to survive. So for this particular kill team, the Hand of the Archon, what an Archon is it's kind of like a Dark Eldar leader. So they can lead an entire city or a planet. In lore, they're called Cabals. So these Archons aren't just powerful warlords, but they're also political leaders. So they control giant swarms of Drukhari. If you're ever reading something like a Black Library book, and the Drukhari are taking over an entire planet or an entire city, chances are there's an Archon kind of leading that and organizing everything. So this kill team are the kind of operatives that are directly under them and doing missions for them. So as far as operative choices for the gameplay, you have some really neat options. Like, obviously you have your gunners and your standard choices, but you also have stuff like the Crimson Duelists. So they can do things like have back-to-back fight actions and help keep your enemies from doing mission actions. And they have a flail that has brutal and can parry multiple hits. So basically that means they can keep your opponent from attacking, and they're almost impossible to block. This team also has a lot of poison usage. Like, they have a pistol that has poison in it, and if you take down an enemy, it deals damage to everything around them. Or they can use combat drugs that can help boost your own operatives or heal them. So this team also does a lot of stuff where they try to trick your opponent. Like, one thing you can do is basically pass on your activation so you don't activate an operative to wait to see what your opponent's going to do. And if your opponent's waiting for that back and forth, trying to time their play, this can really throw them off. Or if they have a ploy they really need to use, you can make them spend extra points to use it, which that can also mess up their strategy. So the main gimmick of this team is the Power from Pain ability. Each time you incapacitate an enemy operative, you get pain tokens based on how tough that operative was. So these pain tokens can be used to extra movement after a fight, do rerolls, or just gain extra actions. So basically when you take down one person, you can snowball it to help you do something else. So this really can be a snowball-y team. If they take down multiple of your operatives, you can really push that advantage by getting a bunch of bonuses. So if you like the Dark Eldar aesthetic, and you were thinking about playing them, this is just a better, more interesting version than the one in the Compendium. So next up, we have the Adeptus Arbites. These are basically law enforcement from the Imperium of Man. So they are human, just like the Imperial Guard, but instead of being a frontline troop, they are judge, jury, and executioner. So most planets have their own defense force. They don't have to rely on the Imperial Guard for everything. And most planets also have their own law enforcement. So these Arbites don't always come in. But what they handle are the biggest crimes against the Imperium. So if a planetary force can't handle it, the Adeptus Arbites will come in. Or if a planet's government has become actually corrupt, like working against the Imperium, they'll come in and remove that government to put someone else in power. So while they are mostly law enforcement, they can fulfill more of a military role. If something like a chaos cult starts rising, or they come in to investigate something and they realize there's a Genestealer cult kind of building up, they will go into planetary defense mode and actually try to protect the planet from that threat. They are very highly trained and do have really good equipment. So for gameplay, let's start off with everybody's favorite model from this team, and that is the Cyber Mastiff. And that is exactly what it sounds like. It's just a robotic dog. So it's pretty solid in melee, but it does have an ability where it can basically detain somebody. So if it catches up to them, it can basically keep them from falling back and force them to stay in one area. Besides that, most of your models will have combat shotguns. So they'll have two profiles. One is a lot of damage up close, or you can shoot farther away and have more hits but less damage. So my guess is this is supposed to represent something like a slug compared to buckshot. So you have a lot of specialty models. Like you have one that basically has a sniper shotgun that's silenced, which is pretty neat. For equipment, you have one that's basically handcuffs where you can actually detain somebody, which basically means if you go and fight them, they can't perform actions anymore. For more equipment, they basically have strobe lights that keep you from rerolling and shooting attacks, and they have a stun grenade. So this team has a lot of crowd control. And for their team-wide ability, they have ruthless efficiency. So normally in Kill Team, if you have a friendly model in melee combat with an enemy, you can't shoot into that combat, because you might hit your own guy. But with them, if you're within 6 inches, you can do that. And you even get bonuses for doing it. So a lot of the gameplay kind of theory of this team is you run guys in there to detain the enemy, or keep them locked up, like keep them from moving, and then you blast them with a shotgun. Which I think as far as combos, that's really fun. I really like the gameplay of this team, where it's the just detaining people, all the shotgun blasting. It's really just an interesting idea, and it's pretty different than anything else we have. And visually, these dudes look awesome. I absolutely love how they look. Next up, we have the Fellgor Ravengers, which are Chaos Beastmen. I did a short video over what they are, like kind of what their origins are, but I'll go over it here very quickly. So basically, they have a few different origins in 40k. One is that they are just a species of humanoid beastmen. So they're humanoid, but they have beast traits, like the horns or hooves or whatever it is. The other is that they were humans, but they mutated and kind of got these animal traits. So between a number of factors of kind of the natural animal aggression and already being outcast by the Imperium, they're very likely to fall to chaos, and that's what we have here. So the other lore of them is that they were kind of servants of chaos, and the way they mutated was into beastmen. So a Zangor is a really good example of that from the Thousand Suns team. And also on that note, if you already have Zangor or just like the Zangor models better, a lot of people are using those models and playing them as these. So if you like those better or you think you want to play Thousand Suns at some point, you might want to pick those up. So before we get into gameplay here, there is a disclaimer I want to make. So when you're watching this, they may have been updated. But as of right now, this team is absolutely busted. So I don't play competitively. I don't keep up with like which teams are best. But I see a lot of stuff of people complaining about this team. So some people want the most powerful team because they want to play competitively. That's awesome. A lot of people don't want teams that they think are busted. I always like the opinion of pick what you like and what you think is the coolest. Because if you try to chase for the best team, it's probably going to get nerfed at some point. Or if you have a team that's really bad that you like them, they'll probably get buffed. What's good and bad is always changing, so I don't pick teams based on that personally. Okay, so their main ability, and the thing that apparently makes them busted, is Frenzy. So this basically means if they're incapacitated, they aren't. They get to stay on the board. They will eventually go away, and you can still take them down with a critical hit, but they get to stay and fight. So this means they get to stay and do damage. So they might be able to get revenge and take out your model as well. Or you just have to use more resources fishing for a critical hit to try to get them off the board. Because they are a very glass cannon team, it's very dangerous to leave them there. So because of that, you really have to be careful when you're going to fight one. There's not really a safe way to go up and fight a Chaos Beastman and get out without a scratch. I overly simplified it, there's more to that rule, but that's the gist of it. They have some pretty interesting unique operatives though. One of them is one of the Goatmen, but he has an extra arm, so he has 3 cleavers. So he can do it where you can run between your operatives and hit each one as he runs by. So this lets you reposition and get some free damage off. There's also one, I don't think this would ever play out in an actual match, but every time he takes down an enemy operative, his critical damage goes higher, and he heals. So theoretically, if he could take down multiple operatives, his critical damage could become absolutely insane. Like I said, I don't really see that snowballing because you only get so many turns in kill team, but I really like that idea. For ploys, they have some stuff where they can charge from concealment, which for the animal side makes a lot of sense. Or you can do things like back-to-back activations to throw off your opponent, or just having extra movement so they can get in close and fight. So the overall theme of this team is taking the fight to your opponent and never letting off the pressure. Even if you lose an operative, they're still keeping pressure on your opponent. So if you play this team, you need to not care about your operatives going down, and you just need to constantly apply pressure and just keep fighting. So if you like that playstyle, I think this would be a really fun team. Just know they probably will get changes at some point. I checked the last data slate before I made this video and didn't see anything. They may have already had changes, so if they have, if someone could correct me down in the comments, that'd be awesome. So the final kill team from the Into the Dark set is actually one of the newest armies in Warhammer 40,000, and that is the Leads of Voltan. And their kill team is called the Hearthkyn Salvagers. So because Voltan are so new to 40k, they don't have a ton of lore about them. Basically, they're space dwarves. Like, just to sum it up, that's what they are. If you're an older Warhammer player, you'd remember them as the squads. So they have really advanced technology, comparable to a lot of the other main factions in 40k. And one thing that sets them apart is they heavily use artificial intelligence, which is strictly forbidden in the Imperium. So the Voltan actually call their AI counterparts Ironkin, and they're actually equal in society. It's not like a servant relationship. Like, they treat them just like they would other Voltan. So it's a lot less grimdark than something like the Imperium Servitors. So I know I've been calling them the Voltan as far as the individual space roars, but the reason they're called the Legions of Voltan is a Voltan is actually like a big AI core, and they basically worship them almost like gods. So for gameplay, the Voltan have 10 operatives, and they're pretty average as far as base stat lines. But what they do have to make up for that is a grudge mechanic. So whenever an enemy takes down an operative, you apply a grudge token to that enemy. And there's some other ways you can apply these as well. So what these grudge tokens do is anytime a Voltan attacks somebody, for every grudge token they have, they can change a normal hit into a crit. This can do stuff like more damage, special effects, or just be harder to block. So if you have one really powerful operative and you're fighting Voltan and they're getting a lot of last hits off, they're going to become an easy target for the Voltan to take out. So they have some pretty fun operatives. One is the Gozer, who he can stun people, and he's one of the few models that can actually move an enemy. So you can actually move them 3 inches. So if you position this really well, you can get behind someone and shove them out in the open, so the rest of your operatives can light them up. Or you can move somebody off an objective. So you get multiple gunner options, and you can have a jetpack. The Voltan are naturally pretty slow, so this jetpack can really help make up for that to get you into some key positions. So you also have a Kinlink, and they have an interesting ability where you can pick one of your opponent's operatives and make them activate last. So if they needed to do something really important, they can't do it until the end of the turning point. Or if they're caught out in a really bad position, you can keep them there. So overall, this team has kind of a nice mix of everything, and if you're new to Kill Team, that means you get a little bit of melee, you get some shooting, you have like a fair number of operatives to work with, and a decent number of specialists. So I think this is just a really good, balanced, all-around team. And I feel like with the kind of Space Dwarf look, people are either going to love or hate it, but if you think that's cool, I think they would be a pretty fun team. So the next 2 teams I'm going to combine as far as lore, because they both come in the Ashes of Faith set, which is actually a narrative set, which is something totally new for Kill Team, at least since the 2021 edition. Those 2 teams are the Chaos Cult and the Imperial Agents. So in this narrative set, there's a city that you're trying to take over, and based on what happens in your matches, you can try to persuade or control different regions, which can give you different bonuses while you play. So for the lore, for a quick summary, there's a planet that's really close to a warp event. And because it's close to this, Chaos has a lot of influence over that planet, and a Chaos cult has started to rise up. And there's members of this cult that are trying to turn the citizens into demons, basically, or at least possessed by demons, and using them to overthrow the planet. And they plan to do a giant ritual. Well, an Inquisitor catches on to this. Inquisitors are basically like super detectives, but they have a lot of power. They're one of the top-ranking people in the Imperium. So the Inquisitor sends in his team to try to stop this. So in the actual Ashes of Faith version of the game, you have 2 objectives. The Cult and the Inquisitor are both trying to win control of the city, and at the end you do a big ritual mission to see if they actually get to reform the ritual, or if the Inquisitor stops them from doing it. So there's 2 victory conditions, and based on who wins what, there's different outcomes. I think it's actually really unique as far as Kill Team sets, and I wish we got kind of more one-off interesting things like that. I don't see it happening very often, but even if they did something like that once a year, it'd be pretty neat. So for gameplay, let's start with the Chaos Cult. So they have one of the more unique mechanics of any Kill Team, because you're actually going to be taking models off the board and replacing them with different models. And this process is called mutation. So you'll start off with a ton of relatively weak models that are just your normal run-of-the-mill cultists that have melee weapons and a pistol. But you can do different things to mutate them into mutants. They lose their range ability, They're not as good at doing missions because they've lost a lot of their humanity, but they're tougher and they're more dangerous up close. And then you can mutate them into Torments, who are way more powerful, do a ton of damage, but they can't do missions at all. They've completely lost their humanity. And they lose all of their range abilities as well. So the whole idea is you start with a bunch of weak models, and then they just get more and more powerful as the game goes on. And when they mutate, you can choose different abilities, like you can choose how they mutate to get different buffs and bonuses. So this is a balancing act, where you want to actually have the combat power of the mutants and the torments, but if you go too heavily into it, and you don't have enough cultists alive, then what happens is you can't do any missions. Like the last game I played with the Chaos Cult, I ended up losing. I basically won the actual combat because I had a bunch of these giant torments running around, but I couldn't actually do the mission anymore. So you really have to be careful about how you're managing it. Besides the actual cultists, you do have some other models. A lot of them look like they're from Lord of the Rings and have a really cool look to them. You have two that are kind of paired swordsmen. You have a Chaos Psyker that can deny areas from far away. And then your leader can force mutations, which can really come in handy. So the other side of the set are the Inquisitorial Agents. Before I go into their actual Inquisitor models, there's one part of this team that's really neat. So when you're building this team, you can either run 12 of the actual agents, or 7 of them in an ancillary support. The ancillary support can be either Sisters of Silence, Veteran Guardsmen, Tempestus Scions, Navy Breachers, or the Arbites or Kasrkin that we talked about earlier in this video. Just be clear, if you pick one of them, you don't miss a match from those choices. So if you pick the Arbites, you're just running Arbites on your team. So if you already have one of those teams and you get Inquisitor models, you can kind of combine the two. Or if you have the Inquisitors and you want to kind of supplement them with another kill team, you can mix and match your kill teams, so you just have more variety when you play. So because of the ancillary support, when it comes to equipment employees, this team is a little bit generic in my opinion. Like, you have some cool stuff, but it's all stuff you kind of expect the Imperial Guard to have. Or at least the more human units. Like, you have stuff like better melee weapons, you have your grenades, you have better armor, that kind of stuff. So as far as the unique models on this team, you have your agent, which is the leader that directly answers the Inquisitor. And he has a Tomb Skull, which is a servo skull, that runs around and can give your team bonuses. You also have an Auto Savant, which can basically give you extra command points when your opponent uses their ploys. But the reason I think that model is really cool is it actually can give you extra experience if you're playing narrative. We've never really seen models that focus on narrative with an ability, so I was pretty happy to see that personally. And one model that a lot of people were really happy about was the Dun Servitor. It can run stuff like multi-melta or plasma cannons, which are just huge duns in 40k. They're really, really powerful. But you need another one of your models nearby to kind of direct him, or he just can't do a whole lot. But if he does, even the tankiest targets can be taken out by those in just one shot. Like, you don't even need to get that lucky. He can just take out stuff like Tyranid Warriors or Custodians relatively easily. And another one of my favorite is the Pistolier Agent. So it has a scoped plasma pistol, which is awesome. And it has a suppressed auto pistol. And with one ability, it can shoot both. So that's just a lot of really reliable, consistent damage out of this model that can take out multiple targets. So I've done videos before where I talk about what I'd like to see in Kill Team, or what I want to come out in like the next season. And until this team, Inquisitors were always top of that list in the comments section. So I know most people were really happy that we finally have Inquisitors in Kill Team. And I just ordered all the Eisenhorn books, so I'm really excited to kind of get more into the Inquisitor lore. Alright, so that wraps up this video. Once we get another chunk of kill teams, I'll do another one following up with that. I think I've covered every kill team that's currently out right now. But if you like seeing kill team content or just wargaming in general, make sure to like and subscribe, and thank you for watching.